so many things happen in our life, and we just kind of wonder, like, how do we get here? What's taking place? Like, what's going on? And that's just not accidental. But the second thing I would tell you is, if you really want to know why you're here or where you're going, you kind of have to know, how did you get here? And so what I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to talk a little bit about some encounters that happened at the end of Acts chapter 16, and then walk back to see, like, when the Lord began doing the work that actually resulted in Acts chapter 16. Okay, and there's a reason for doing that. I really think there's some lessons that we learn from studying kind of this way. So I'm actually going to start in the book of Philippians, and I'm just going to read one quick verse here in Philippians chapter 1, 2 verses maybe. Chapter 1, verses 12 and 13, okay? This is what it says. It says, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And so Paul is writing this book, which we call Philippians, and it's called Philippians because it's written to the church in a city called Philippi, right? And he's writing to them, and what he tells them is, I want you to know that the things that happened to me happened for the sake of the gospel. But he doesn't say what things happened to him, okay? But they know what has happened to him because they were there when the church was planted. And so he's kind of coming to them, and it's like if you know some people and you've been through some stuff with them, and you write them an email and you say, hey, all this stuff that we went through, here's kind of why we went through it. But you don't say what the stuff is. They already know, though. All right? But he's framing it, and he's saying all this stuff happened so that the gospel would move forward. And I really like that, because I think that's kind of the message that we have this morning, is so many things in our life have happened for the sake of the gospel, but we didn't see them as for the sake of the gospel, or didn't know kind of how it has taken place. And so, having said that, all right, let's jump into the book of Acts. So this is going to be Acts chapter 16. And so Acts tells the story of the expansion of the early church, right? So from the time of Christ till the time that the church is spread throughout all of what becomes the Middle East and Europe, that early expansion really is taking place in the book of Acts. And so in the book of Acts, we have kind of three, what we call missionary journeys of Paul. Okay? And it's really not accurate to call them the three missionary journeys. It's really more accurate to say the first missionary journey and then like revisiting those people a couple times. Okay? With a little bit of different ministry that takes place. But here's kind of the question. How did this church come to be in the city of Philippi that Paul starts to write to? You know? So Paul writes the letter of Philippians while he's in jail. He's going through some really rough stuff. They know that. And he's writing to them to encourage them. In fact, if you wanted to describe the book of Philippians, what you would say is, Philippians is really a story about joy. Which is really an ironic thing to get from a guy who's in jail, right? Like if you're in jail and you write, maybe you don't write a letter that's like, hey, everybody rejoice. You know, I just want to let you know the things that have happened to me. It's all for the gospel. You know, you usually write that kind of stuff, you know, at like a birthday party or, I don't know, some like great thing that's happened in your life. You know, you have, I see plenty of babies around and another one coming soon, right? And those are celebratory times. You look at it and you say, oh, this is fantastic. This stuff's all for the gospel. But what he's saying is, I'm in jail, by the way, but you remember this time that I was in jail in Philippi, and this is kind of where the story begins, or kind of ends, but where we're going to begin, okay? So this is Acts 16. I'm going to read verse 25 through 39. And we're going to read a lot of scripture this morning, so just bear with me. So it says, we good? All right?
Yeah, we're good.
So about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundation of the prison was shaken, and immediately all the doors were opened, and everyone's bonds were unfastened. And when the jailer woke and saw that the prison doors were open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, supposing that the prisoners had escaped. But Paul cried out with a loud voice, do not harm yourself, we're all here. And the jailer called for the lights and rushed in, and trembling with fear, he fell down before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and said, sirs, what must I do to be saved? And they said, believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your whole house. And they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in the house, and he took them to the same hour of the night and washed their wounds, and he was baptized at once, he and all his family. And they brought them up to the house and set food before them, and he rejoiced along with his entire household that he had believed in God. But when it was day, the magistrate sent the police, saying, "Let those men go." And the jailer reported the words Paul, saying, "The magistrates have sent to let you go. Therefore come out now and go in peace." But Paul said to them, "They've beaten us publicly, uncondemned men who have Roman citizenship, and have thrown us into prison. And do they not throw us? Now they throw us out secretly? No, let them come to themselves and take us out." And the police reported these words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard they were Roman citizens. So they came and apologized to them, and took them out, and asked them to leave the city. So they went out of the prison and visited Lydia, and when they had seen the brothers, they encouraged them and departed. All right, so this is an interesting story of what takes place. They're in prison in the city of Philippi, and they're singing praises to the Lord. Sometimes you get to sing praises to the Lord in really exciting places. You know, in places that you expect, in places that you want. But Paul and Silas are singing praises to the Lord in prison, in a really bad place. Okay? And yet, in the midst of their singing, the Lord causes an earthquake, and now they're free to go. But they don't leave, which is weird, right? Because if you're in jail and you're singing praises to the Lord, and the Lord comes and does this mighty thing, don't you think all right, sweet, we're out? But they weren't thinking about themselves. They were thinking about the Philippian jailer. Okay? And really, this is kind of the way it worked. In those days, being a jailer was not such a bad job unless your people got away. Okay? Because if your people got away, everyone held you accountable and just killed you. It was not a great plan. But this was the situation. And so he comes, the jailer shows up, having seen the earthquake, seeing that all the chains are gone, and he's about to fall on his sword because his way of dying is going to be better than the way they're going to kill him. Right? And Paul says, hey, don't hurt yourself. We're all still here. And the guy's like, why? kind of. And he says to them, what must I do to be saved? Now, he's not asking a question about salvation like we understand salvation, is he? He's asking, hey, how do I keep from dying here? What do I have to do so that the people don't kill me? But Paul takes it and turns it the other way, and he says, repent, believe on the Lord, and you and your whole house will be saved. And so he wasn't being asked a spiritual question, but he answers a spiritual answer. And they go to the Philippian jailer's house. They baptize this guy and his whole family. They all become believers here. And they all become a part of the church that will be the church at Philippi. And he will be one of the people, by the way, that the book of Philippians is written to. When he says to them, I want to encourage you that the things that have happened to me happened for the sake of the advancement of the gospel. The Philippian jailer, he knows that. He's the recipient of the gospel. Isn't that kind of an interesting thing when you look at this? I think this is fascinating. So Paul and Silas are in awful conditions. They're singing praises to God because God is worthy. Still. Do you know what I mean by still? We've taught my kids a few things. One of the things we teach them is they're not allowed to say, you can't do this, or I can't do this. What we tell them is, we say, I can't do this yet. Right? Because there's some things you don't know how to do yet. Some things you can't do yet, but eventually you will. What we say about God is worthy still. Right? Even in spite of the crazy stuff that happens in your life, God is still worthy. When you go to work, as usual, and get laid off, He is worthy still. When you go to the doctor and you get a bad report, He is worthy still. Right? When you stand over the grave of somebody who was close to you, He is worthy still. When you're in prison, falsely, like Paul is, He's worthy still. And they're singing praise to the Lord. God busts them out, but they don't leave. And then at the end, there's this interesting phrase. It says, go greet the church that is at Lydia's house. Well, how did the church get to be at Lydia's house? I'm glad you asked. Let's go back a few verses. We're going to read backwards. Right? So we jump back up to verse 11. Okay? And so the scripture says, so setting sail from Troas, we'll get to that point in a minute, we made a direct voyage to Samothrace, and following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is the leading city of the district of Macedonia, and a Roman colony, and we remained in the city some days. And on the Sabbath we went outside the gate to the riverside, where we were supposed the place of prayer, and we sat down and spoke to the women who had come together, and one who heard us was a woman named Lydia, from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple goods, who was a worshiper of God, and the Lord opened her heart to pay attention to what was said by Paul. And after she was baptized, and her household as well, she urged us, saying, if you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay. And she prevailed upon us. So when Paul gets to Philippi, they're looking for a place to worship. They're looking for some place, to kind of encounter people. And they run into these ladies. They begin to share the gospel. And one of the ladies is a lady named Lydia, who was from a place called Thyatira, which also shows up in the New Testament a little bit. There's a letter to them in the book of Revelation, right? And so she comes to this place. She becomes a believer. God opens her heart. And then she welcomes the people to come and head to her house. So now the church in Philippi is meeting at Lydia's house. Isn't that cool? And so I think this is kind of an interesting thing, the way that God has kind of brought her into the picture. And then she says, all right, why don't you guys just come and stay at my house? But then what happens? Okay, this is where it gets a little crazy, because how did Paul and Silas go from meeting at Lydia's house to ending up in jail? Right? Verse 16. As we were going to the place of prayer, we were met by a slave girl who had a spirit of divination and brought her owners much gain by fortune-telling. And she followed Paul and us, crying out, "These men are servants of the Most High God, who proclaim to you the way of salvation." And this she kept doing for many days. And Paul, having become greatly annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, "I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." And it came out that very hour. Oh, thank you. Water. I like it. So, they're on their way to go to Lydia's house to meet. And every day they're going by. And the slave girl, who's possessed by a demon, says, "These men are servants of the Most High God." And they're annoying Paul. Okay? Now, isn't this weird? Because it doesn't say Paul had compassion on her, or he felt bad, or he saw something. He says he was really annoyed. Like, you're driving me nuts. And so he casts a demon out of this girl, okay? And the demon leaves. But now what happens? She can no longer tell fortunes to people, and she's of no value to her masters, and so the masters are going to throw a fit. Verse 19. But her owners saw that their hope of gain was gone, so they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the rulers. And when they had brought them to the magistrates, they said, "These men are Jews. They're disturbing our city. They advocate customs that are not lawful to us as Romans to accept or practice." And the crowd joined in attacking them, and the magistrates tore their garments off them and gave orders to beat them with rods. And when they had inflicted many blows on them, they threw them into prison, ordering the jailer to keep them safely. Having received this order, he put them in the inner prison and fastened their feet in stocks. So, how does he end up in jail? He's annoyed by the slave girl. He casts a demon out of her, and then they say, "You know what, we can no longer use her to make money," and they throw a fit, and this is what they claim. They say, "These people are Jews. They're not Roman citizens like the rest of us. We need to put these guys in jail." But what do we find out at the end, right? Paul's a Roman citizen. He doesn't have to take this. And later on, that's what he's going to tell them. When he gets busted out of jail, he's going to tell them, "Hey, by the way, we're Roman citizens too," and it freaks them all out. Right? And they're like, "Oh, well, look, you guys just go away quietly." It's like, no, you beat us publicly. You get to come and apologize publicly. But he comes into this situation, and he still lets them beat him and go to jail. Why? Right? Why? Because this is about the Philippian jailer. Right? It's used for the kingdom. Right? And it's all part of this plan that God is kind of working out in Paul's life to get to the Philippian jailer. And I really think this is an interesting situation for us, okay? By the way, I love that Luke records this in Acts, and it says Paul was just annoyed. And it doesn't say, like, Paul had compassion. And so, at some point, Paul's probably got to have a conversation with Luke, maybe like in heaven. Like, why did you include this detail? Why did you say, "Oh, you were annoyed"? Like, what's up with that? But the biblical authors have very little use in glorifying each other. Their interest is just to tell the story, right? And I think that's kind of an interesting thing, because the story is not about great people. It's a story about a great Savior and broken people.
Amen.
Lots of broken people throughout, okay? So this is how the church in Philippi got started. But how did Paul get to Philippi in the first place, all right? I'm not going to read all of these things. I'm just going to work backwards, because otherwise we'd be here all day. But Paul and his team, right, they're traveling through what is present-day Turkey. And they're on their way to the city of Ephesus, which is in what the region of Asia. Now, when we think about Asia, we think about it as something different. But when the scripture talks about Asia, it's kind of talking about Western Turkey, where Ephesus is like the New York City of Western Turkey. Okay, it's like a big, big place. And that's where they're trying to go. So they're traveling towards Asia, And it says the Spirit forbid them to go to Asia. So like on the way, they're going, and the Lord stopped them. And they're like, okay, well, we can't go west. South is the Mediterranean. Let's go north. And they start north, and it says the Spirit forbid them to go into Phrygia, which was the region to the north. So they can't go west. They can't go north. South is the ocean. East is back from where they came from. And so they run into the ocean kind of to the northwest in a city called Troas. And they're like, what do we do now? We don't know what to do. And it says, the scripture says that they had a vision of a man from Macedonia saying, come over here and help us. Okay? And so they took that as a leading of the Lord. They all got on a boat and they went across the water, and Macedonia is where Philippi is. That's how they get there. Right? They get there in this like weird transition between I can't go here, I can't go here, where else are we supposed to go? And the Lord gives them a vision. And they're moving forward. And I think this is kind of an interesting thing. But why were they out on this second journey to begin with? If you read back a little bit further, what you find is they decided, let's just go visit the churches we planted on the first missionary journey. So in the first missionary journey, God speaks to them, tells them separate Saul and Barnabas, and pray for them, and they send them out. And they go and they plant these churches. But in the second journey, they just decide, let's just go visit the churches, even though these churches beat us in the first time. And they just go. And so I share all these stories because I want you to think about this. Like sometimes God like specifically leads us in a way. And that's really cool, right? You have very clear direction from the Lord. But a lot of times it's just, I made a decision. I'm trying to do these things to follow the Lord. He leads us. He kind of shuts some doors. And you just kind of work your way into this. And it's kind of an awkward thing because you think the Lord would just say, Paul, get up and go to Philippi. We've got some people waiting for you there. But that's not what happens. They make a decision to go. They're going this way. God stops them. They start another way. God stops them. They're like, where do we go? God gives them a vision. They cross the ocean. They show up there. They meet some random lady named Lydia. She's like, come bring the church to our house. And they're like, okay, we have no better options. We're coming to your house. And then they're coming to his house every day. They run into the slave girl. They're annoyed by this. You know, every day with the, you're the servants of the Most High God. So cast the demon out of her, lands them in jail. Right? And they decide to sing praises to the Lord in jail. God busts them out of jail, but they don't leave because it brings the salvation and brings the kingdom to the church in Philippi, to the Philippian jailer. And later he's going to write about this, and what he writes is, you know, I want to encourage you that all these things that have happened for the sake of the gospel. But what a weird story this is about how God advances his kingdom. For most of us, what we think is this, right? I'm going to follow the Lord. He's going to speak to me. I'm going to do what he says. It's going to be great. But most of the time, we operate between like the providence and wisdom of God and human confusion. And we do the best we can, and we kind of make our way, and we kind of stumble through this, and then we figure it out, and then the Lord kind of leads in another way, and we just follow him, right? And I think this is so relevant for us in the midst of church planting. Because church planting is just like this. You start a new church. You think it's going to go this way, it goes that way, you don't know where you're going to meet, God provides a building, you find another building, you just work your way through the situation, and you just roll with it a little bit, following the Lord. And so we can kind of go backwards, like all the way, even to the book of Deuteronomy. Because in the first, you know, like just a couple more of these, and then I'm going to like really hone in on why we're talking about this. But when they're going on the first missionary journey, they're planting churches in the synagogues. And the synagogues are places where the Jews were already. But how did the Jews get there? The scripture says all the way back in Deuteronomy, right? If you want to look that up later, it's Deuteronomy 26, 64 through 68. He says, one of these days, you guys are going to be disobedient. I'm going to scatter you through the whole region. Because people are going to come in, they're going to take you from your place, they're going to drop you off in some place you didn't plan to go. And we call this the exile. These people were brought out of Israel. So in one sense, what happens is they're disobedient, so God scatters them. That's true. That happened to them. But in another sense, what's happening is God is laying the foundation for future missionary expansion 400 years later. Do you see this? And so how are these people in that moment to know that's what's happening? There's no way for them to know. But God is weaving together this like really beautiful story that's all over the globe and throughout history. And only now can we even look back and we can say, look at this beautiful thread that's being woven through here. In the moment, they can't see that. All they can see is like, hey, why are we getting carried off into exile? This really sucks, you know? Like, what's happening here? But God is laying a foundation for stuff that is to come after. And so really when we look at the book of Acts, and really Acts 16, what you find is, here's this story of an unfolding of a plan that you can very clearly tell when you read this. They don't know where they're going. They're just doing the best they can to follow the Lord. And I think that's really encouraging to me, because my experience has been more like that than it has been some other people. Like, so you go to a big conference, somebody stands up and this is what they're going to tell you. God spoke to me, I did this, and look at this great thing that happened. But you don't hear the whole story all the time. Okay? Because the whole story is never that clean. So here's my story, okay? I'm going to share a bit of how I got to be where I am, because I relate to this so well. When I was a kid, I watched the movie Top Gun. You guys see the movie Top Gun? And I thought this was the coolest thing in the whole world. And so I decided I'm going to be an aircraft. Like, I'm gonna be a pilot. I'm gonna fly jets off an aircraft carrier. That's my thing. I'm doing that. And like in my head, I had this idea about like how cool of the leather jacket I was gonna get, like Maverick, you know, and then what they were gonna call me, like what my call sign was gonna be. And I was like, I'm gonna do this. I was like 6 years old. Now, should 6-year-olds be watching Top Gun? No. That's a whole different question for another time, right? But I was raised in a small church, smaller than this one. The building was smaller than this one, and there were 16 old people and me. All right? Me and my brother. My grandparents brought me to church. My parents were alcoholics till I was about 11 years old. It was rough in my house. Okay? Maybe some of you have similar experiences, but so I went to church with the old people. There's only 3 or 4 of them still living, including my grandma, who lives with us now. But they brought me to church from the time I was a little bitty. But my faith wasn't really real for me. It wasn't really my thing. It wasn't something I owned. I was just drugged along to this old person church in this little place, you know. I'm from a town of 1,300 people in rural Oklahoma, right? My dad was a telephone repairman. It was rough times for us growing up. But my brother got invited to a church camp because he was good at Bible trivia, because we've been raised in church for a long time. My brother was a reckless goober, you know, like he was not like the greatest person. And he went to this camp, and then some people took him to like a revival service in another state, and his life changed. And I don't know if you've ever had somebody close to you have a radical encounter with the Lord and their life just changed, and you don't understand it, and you don't know what's going on. But he came home, and he started reading his Bible every day and praying every day. And I was like, hey dude, I mean, I know we go to church on Sundays, we go to church on Wednesdays, but what is the deal? And I kept like coming into his room, and I'd find him praying. And I was like, what did you do with my brother, man? Like, what has happened? And he began to talk to me about how he had an encounter with the Lord. And I thought, really? Really? I mean, because in my mind, all I thought about was like the church in this little tiny town, in this little tiny place. You know, our little building was like so beat up. You know, like if it rained, it would like flood in the back corner. You know, and then like the wind would come in underneath the doors. It was always really cold and drafty. And it was old people, man. Like like really, you had an encounter with the Lord? And I began to question some things in my life. You know, and I had this great plan. I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, fly jets off an aircraft. And about that time in my life, I got accepted to West Point, to the Naval Academy, and the Air Force Academy. And that was my plan, was to go play football and baseball for one of the academies and fly jets off a carrier. That was my deal. I was going to do that. And I got invited to this church camp. I went to the camp, and I got invited because, again, I'm good at Bible trivia. I was raised in a tiny church. I was the only person. I had a Sunday school class. It was just me in the class with like one person teaching me. So I knew the Bible, but it wasn't ever something that had really penetrated my heart. And it was at this camp, and God just did a work in my life. And I didn't know how to explain it to anybody. But I felt like the Lord was telling me I needed to go to school at Oral Roberts and study the Bible and not play ball anymore. I didn't understand that at all at the moment. But I remember I was praying, and I had this encounter, and this little lady, the cafeteria lady from our church camp, she came up and she was praying with me one night, and she said, young man, you know where you're supposed to go, don't you? She said, young man, you know what you're supposed to do, don't you? And I said, yeah. And so I went and I withdrew from the service academies and put in an application to the only school that did not offer me a full scholarship that also happened to not be free. And I said, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And I had no idea what it meant. Like, literally no idea. And so when I went to campus at ORU, Oral Roberts University, where I went to school, it's like 50 miles from where I grew up. I'd never been on the campus. And I just showed up. I said, here I am. We're going to figure this thing out. And during my first year at the university, it was such an incredible time. We had a chapel service for missions. Okay? And they said, this week it's missions chapel. And I thought, this is going to be great. We're going to have an old guy and slideshow. And he's going to come and he's going to show us about all the stuff that happened. Because that's what happened in the little church where I grew up, you know? They had the old guy come and he's like, this is what we've been doing in Nicaragua, you know? And I thought, that's what's going to happen. And they said, no, this is where we tell you about how you can go and be involved in missions. And I thought, I don't understand. They said, no, we're taking teams all around the world. You can go and be a part of the deal. I was like, what? What do you mean? You can go. And it blew my mind. And I said, yeah, I think this is what the Lord wants me to do. And so I decided to sign up. I'm going to go. They were talking about all these crazy places they were taking teams, to Africa and Asia and everywhere. And I thought, this is amazing. I'm going to sign up. They're going to send me to like the jungle in Brazil or some crazy place in Africa. It's going to be awesome. Okay? And I signed up, go to the first meeting. And they tell you all this stuff, and everybody's so excited. And then at the end, they tell you, and you have to raise $2,500 for this. Okay? I said, what? $2,500? You might as well have said $1 million. I don't have $2,500. At that time in my life, guys, I had never seen a $100 bill with my eyes. I'd never seen a physical one. I knew what they looked like. I'd seen pictures of them. I'd seen them on TV. I knew other people had them. But with my eyes, I had never physically seen a $100 bill. My parents gave me $20 a week, every 2 weeks. $20 every 2 weeks. And that was $10 for gas to get back and forth to see them, and $10 for a haircut, so I shaved my head. And I was like rich. You know? Now I got cash. This is amazing. And they said to me, you got to raise $2,500. I was like, I don't have $2,500. They said, no, God will provide. And I was like, I mean, he was going to have to. How am I going to do this? And so I signed up for this stuff, thinking they're going to send me to Africa or some crazy place. And do you know what? They put me on a team to Curacao and Aruba. All right? Which is like, if you're really doing well in life, this is a place you vacation. Yes. And so, I don't know if you know this, but it's like super hard to raise money to go to the Caribbean on missions. You know, if someone comes and tells you, God's calling me to Honolulu, like you're going to have a problem. And so no one gave me money. I sent out letters. I talked to people. So we go months, right? And there's a 50% deadline. I had $0. And I'm not talking about like I had a few. I mean, I had zero. No one had given me $1. Everybody was like, are you crazy? And so this is the day before the 50% deadline. I went to my team leader and I said, hey man, this has been fun. I don't think this is going to work. You know? Like, I'm going to have no money. Even now, at ORU, by the way, they give everybody $1 to start. Just because they call it the mission seed, right? No one should have to look down and see $0. You know, it's like, where was that when I started? And so he told me, hey man, you don't have to quit. Make them kick you off the team. Just hold out. Maybe the Lord will provide. And the next day, someone who didn't have the money wrote a check for half my trip. $1,250. They didn't have it. They did it anyways. Like it was not excess for them. It was a huge sacrifice. I only got 4 total donations, but it paid for my trip. And that was my first trip. It was May of 1999. Right? And I said to the Lord, wherever you want me to go, I will go. Whenever you want me to go, I will go. And that was my first trip. This year, right, I have 3 more international trips coming this year. I'll get over 100 trips. We've been to 50 countries doing work all over the world. Crazy, crazy stuff. But the Lord provided, and I had no idea about that stuff. And so I went to my church about that time in my life, and I said to them, you know, hey, I have some suggestions about some things in the church. And they said, you look like just the person to implement those things. And I created for myself a volunteer position on the staff of the church. And for 2 years, I served as a volunteer. 2 years part-time and then 2 years full-time for the church while I was doing my schooling. It's 50 miles away from where I was at. And I drove back and forth, going to serve the church, these people who sent me. Right? The Lord opened all kinds of doors. And then I began to sense that God was calling me to plant a church. And I didn't know anything about church planting. But I was like, this is what God is calling me to do, so we're going to do it. You know, and I didn't come out of like a big church that could pay for it. In fact, the church just said, hey, good luck, you know? And so I said, what do we do? So we started meeting in my living room. in 2007, we started inviting people to come over to the living room. And I'm in a place where there are plenty of churches around us. And they got big buildings and nice facilities. And I'm like, no, you should come and worship with us in my living room. Some days people came, and a lot of days no one came. And we would do dinner after every service. And we'd get together, and we'd all eat together. But most of the time, it's like 5 people. You know? And I started attracting Starbucks employees to the church, which I'm not sure why. And instead of giving in the offering, they would take their mark out of a pound of coffee and drop it in the offering. They're like, it's like Old Testament tithing. And I was like, guys, I can't sell this. What do you want me to do with this? It says explicitly, do not resell. I have bills to pay. And we were struggling so bad. We were trying to figure this stuff out. And at the end of 2007, we had an ice storm in Oklahoma. And the city was without power for more than a week in Tulsa. But my power had been shut off 3 days before the ice storm because I couldn't pay the bill. And I sent my wife and my kids to Texas to go stay with my in-laws, which was super humbling. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to pay the bills, guys. What's going to happen here? You know, so people called and they said, hey, is the power back on in Owasso, the town where I was at? And I was like, you got to call somebody else. I don't really know. You know, so I'm pitched a tent in my living room. And I'm like, what are we going to do? And, so he paid the bill. And I was like, I don't think we can do this anymore. We're trying to get the church off the ground. I don't know how it's going to work. And so I sensed the Lord wanted me to go and take a hiking trip. All right? And I don't know how to explain this. I've not had that experience before or since. But I said, I really feel like I need to go and do this. So I told my wife, I'm going to go and hike. We got a wilderness area a couple hours from where we live. And I went by myself to go hike. It was the first week of January 2008. It was 20 degrees during the daytime. All right, and I went on a 20-mile hike, and I hiked, and as it was starting to get dark, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I realized I'm about to endure 14 hours of darkness, and I don't have any idea how to stay warm. And I had a machete, so I started chopping down trees and built a fire. And it was the longest, coldest, hardest night of my life. You know, every minute felt like an eternity. And I thought to myself the whole time, man, you are an idiot, you know? How dumb are you? Why did you do this? You just did it. No one made you do this. They didn't put a gun to your head and drag you out here. You're going to die in the woods, you know? And I thought, what am I doing? And the whole night was so frustrating. And I was trying to sleep for a half hour and then stoke the fire and stay alive, you know? I don't know how cold it got, but it was 20 degrees during the day. I got up the next morning, packed up my stuff in my backpack, and started back up over this, it's about a 2,000-foot elevation gain, which is the biggest we have in Oklahoma, over the top of this thing. And there's a wilderness road that goes through here. And I was wearing a red and black and white camouflage shirt, okay? I don't know where that makes me camouflage, but that's what I had. And this dude said that he's driving his truck on this random road, and he sees me, because how can you not see me in this red camouflage shirt? And he pulls over and he goes, hey man, you okay? I was like, I'm just taking a walk, you know? And he said, you want to ride into town? And I was like, yes. I would very much like a ride into town. And I got in the car with the guy. I'm not making this up. 1 minute into the conversation, he says, man, my life is just so jacked up. You think you could pray for me? Tell me something? And I'm like, really? And so we stopped. He stops on the side of the road. I'm telling you guys, you'd never believe this if it wasn't true. He stops on the side of the road. There's a little sign that says, Outdoor Air Prayer Place. Welcome to Oklahoma, right? And there's a little spot over here, and there's a little building made out of bricks, and it's got a plexiglass wall, and it's got G.I. Joe figurines posed in Bible stories, and it says Bible Museum on it. Wow. Never seen anything like it, still, to this day. And then there's a little walkway here with around a hill with 3 crosses, and a sidewalk going around. And each of the sidewalk sections has a different book of the Bible named engraved on it. I don't know who did this, okay? So I walk with this guy around here out in the blustery cold, you know, and we kneel down out in the middle of the field, and I led this dude to the Lord. And he prayed one of the most real prayers, profanity-laced prayers that I won't repeat. Lord, you can forgive my dumb, my life is so effed up, and so we just prayed. And I thought, you guys, no one's going to believe this. No one's going to believe this. But you know what happened, right? I completely forgot about the night I spent in the cold. It was God sent me to go meet this random dude. And I went home, right? And I got back to Tulsa, and I told my wife, I said, you'll never believe what happened. And so I went to this like old guy Bible study breakfast that happened every week that I was going to all the time, just trying to meet people, you know. And they said, hey, does anybody have anything they want to share from this week? And I was like, yeah, I think I do. And I shared my story with these guys, and they said, that's incredible. How's your church going? I was like, oh, it's not. We don't have any money. We're trying to figure this whole thing out. And so one of the guys said, do you have a place to meet? And I said, no, we meet in my living room. He said, how would you like to meet in our building? We have a church building that I run. I'm like the administrator for it. We use part of the building, but it's a really big building. You want to meet in our building? And I said, dude, I would love that, but I have no money. He said, I'll tell you what, we'll charge you per person rent, right? So if somebody shows up, you owe us $2 per person. If no one shows up, you don't owe us any money. And I was like, that I can do. And another guy who was there, he said, we want to make a donation to the ministry, and we want to help you out. How much do you need? And I said, honestly, you're asking me how much I need? He's like, yeah, how much do you need? I said, I need like $25,000 over the next year. He said, okay, we're going to do it. And they gave us $2,000 a month to keep the church alive. And we went to this building, and we met in this area, and it was called the Pit, I swear. It's called the Pit. It was an orchestra pit. It was where the youth met in this one building. So we met during their service, okay? So like it's a big, huge church building, massive building. They met on one side of it, their youth met here, and then they'd all kind of go to their main service. Then we would come in, and we'd meet in this little area called the Pit, and then they would all leave, and then when we were done with our service, nobody was still around, right? So that was kind of how this thing worked. And we did it for 2 years, meeting here, and we had all kinds of crazy things, all right? We were meeting in a youth room. It's pretty tough to bring people in. We had no chairs. It was just kind of one of those rooms that like had little squares kind of coming down. And so we just sat everybody there, and if you were lucky, you caught one of the pillows that was there, you know, which is super easy to bring people, you know. You're like, oh, yeah, come to our church. It's really awesome. We meet in the Pit, you know. And we did this all the time. And crazy stuff happened, guys, like the craziest. So one week they like rented out our rooms we're using for kids ministry to like a Narcotics Anonymous group. And so we show up, and these guys are like drinking coffee and eyeballs this big, you know. I'm like, who are you people? They're like, oh, we're here for a meeting. I was like, what meeting, you know? And I was like, are these people here for the church? And one weekend, they had a funeral in the church, but they misplaced the body. They didn't know where the casket was. And they're running around asking my people, hey, have you guys seen the body? And I was like, are you serious? Is this really happening right now? You know? And they're asking everybody. I was like, I'm trying to bring people into the church, you know, talk them into coming. And it's like, no, we're a real church. Like, it's real. It happens, you know? And it was crazy, and that stuff was nuts. And then one day we had, they had like the Hmong New Year festival. They do it at that church, but no one told us. And we show up one day, and there's like 2,000 Asians in the parking lot. And they're like taking money to get in the parking lot and like waving through the white people. You know, I was like, what is going on? And the smell of like Korean barbecue is wafting down our hallway. You know, and I'm like, what is the deal? And the last year we were there, somebody thought it was a good idea to steal all the copper out of the AC units to sell the copper. It was $100,000 worth of damage for like $500 worth of copper. Oh. So they put up signs later that said, please don't steal this stuff. If you need $500, please just call us. Okay, because like, we will help you, don't take our electricity. Well, we spent a whole summer in Oklahoma with no AC. So we had these giant fans that they brought us. They're like, no, we got fans. But they sounded like a jet engine. So like during worship, we like put the fans, and they're like blowing through the hallways to keep everybody like moderately not hot. And then during the preaching, we shut it off because you couldn't hear. And then we just preach really fast. You know, still I talk fast from some of this. Talk really fast and then get out before everybody's just pouring in sweat, because Oklahoma summer is like not a good place to have no AC. And so we said, man, we need a new place. And so we said, all right, Lord, what's the next thing? So we decided to rent a movie theater. And we didn't have the money for it. And I went to the guys who owned the movie theater, right? And I told them, I said, we're gonna do this thing. We're gonna rent the movie theater. And this guy's not a believer, and even in Tulsa, he just didn't understand. How is this gonna work? And I was like, just trust us. We're gonna do it. And the Lord opened the door and we went to the movie theater. And while we were in the movie theater, like we're doing this, and people just started coming, man. One of the people who started coming was Ryan, right? He came to be a part of our church, right? There's 1,000 churches in our city, and he came to be a part of the church, like in the movie theater. You know? I was like, no, we're a real church, I promise, you know? And every once in a while, they'd accidentally kick on like the movies during our service, you know, and they'd like start running the previews and like have to go run and tell the guys, hold on, pause, sermon coming back, you know, and have to like deal with this. And it was crazy like that. We were in the theater for 3 years. And then one day they came and told us, they said, hey, by the way, we're going to sell the movie theater. And I was like, really? When? Oh, like 10 days from now. We were homeless. Our church was. And we merged with another church, an old dying Baptist church. They were all dying off, but they had an old building. We said, we're in, let's do this. And so we relaunched and kept doing this stuff. And so Ryan became our youth pastor. And he served with us there, Ryan and Sam both. And we were really grateful for that because they were faithful with us during this time when, like, I mean, we didn't look like a real church, you know? And through all that stuff, like, we went through that, and then I ended up going to Nevada for a year and then launching our ministry, which I'll talk more about. But why share all of this stuff? I'm telling you this because, man, you guys, when you follow the Lord, it doesn't go quite like you think it's going to go from the beginning, but the Lord has a plan. Like, in my life, that's what it's been. So here's what I would tell you, right? All of this leading into, like, 4 thoughts, okay? And then this. The first one is there's no such thing as a straight line following Jesus. It doesn't happen, almost for anybody. You follow the Lord, He leads this direction and that direction, and you start this way, and He says, oh, don't go to Asia. So you start that way. He says, yeah, you can't go here either. And you're like, what am I supposed to do? No one I know who's faithfully followed the Lord into ministry has ever had, like, step by step by step, just following things like that. It's just part of what happens. In fact, there's this passage in Exodus chapter 13 and 14 when the people of Israel are like leaving in the Exodus. You know, God has like done all these plagues. They're on their way out. And it says in Exodus 13 that God didn't lead them by the way of the Philistines, though it was near, but He took them the long way. And then in Exodus 14 it says, and then He sent them back to where they just came from so that Pharaoh would chase them. And I thought, what a dumb thing. Like, you're going out of here. You're trying to get away from these guys. And the Lord leads you, and He's like, no, don't go the short way. Take the long way. You're like, really? The long way? Why? And then you get all the way out there, and then Moses stands up, and he's like, there's a whole multitude of people, and he says, oh, the Lord is leading us to go back. And they're like, what? The whole thing was to get us out of here. And they go back. And they get back, and what happens? Then Pharaoh's like, you know what? They're here. They're wandering. They don't know what they're doing. So he chases them out there. You know? And so I feel like the Lord called me. He called me out to Nevada. I moved my whole family out to the desert. And in the process of moving out there, you know, we began to sense that, like, man, we have all these international needs and so many churches that want to get connected with international projects, and they don't know where to start. And so I went to my people out there and said, I really feel like this is what God's calling us to do, and we're going to move back to Oklahoma. And they're like, you just got here. And I was like, I know. It's weird, right? I don't know how to explain this. We're trying to follow the Lord. So we moved back, and we started Project Docs a little more than a year ago. We have 3 people living full-time in Romania now. We have projects in 9 countries. We raised a little more than $120,000 for missions projects last year. It'll be more like $350 in the next year. You know, the Lord has given us a team of interns. We're taking people all over the place. We're doing really great stuff. Like, He's opening doors like crazy. But I'm in this situation trying to explain to people, hey, yeah, we're just getting started. They're like, I thought you moved. And I was like, I did. They're like, but you're here. And I was like, yeah, but we moved back. You know, and I didn't understand it, but this is the deal, guys. There's no straight lines in kingdom. Rarely. We follow the Lord where He leads.
Amen.
You know? The second thing I'd tell you is, almost no one who seeks to do things of significance for the Lord will do it without a measure of adversity that they can't anticipate in the moment they begin the endeavor. Okay? When Ryan told me, I feel like God's calling me to plant a church, man, I was so excited and so terrified and so happy and also so worried. Because I've been there and I understand, like, you know, this is what I told him then. This is what I'm telling you now. Right? You start this stuff, the Lord will provide. He will do what He does in these circumstances. But it will not be without adversity. And it will not be without days where you just say, I just don't want to do this anymore. You know? My buddy Josh, he's a pastor in Austin. Josh is a good dude. I was talking to Josh this morning. And I was talking to him this week. He's had kind of a tough season. He had a guy, you know, their church is going pretty well for the last 3 years, but they found out 2 weeks ago, that the school they're renting is going to up their rent by $1,000 a month. Whoa. They didn't know that. And then they had a guy get really offended who was like a major donor, and he left, and that's $1,600 a month that he he was given. He just got offended and left. And so they had like a $2,500 a month shift. It's like a 20% of their budget shift. And he's like, what am I supposed to do? And we joke about it as church planners. We say, man, everybody wants to quit once a month, you know? That's just part of what happens. So in an attempt to follow the Lord, you will not do it without adversity. If you do, you'll be the first one. You should write about it because people don't want to hear your story. Most everybody else, you do something, you say, all right, Lord, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to do this thing for you. You're going to find yourself someday saying, like, what was I thinking? What in the world am I doing out here in the cold all by myself? Like, why did I do this? Amen. You know? And you did it to yourself, right? Isn't that the craziest part? I felt like, I'm just so dumb. You know, like, all these people are so smart. They're doing things around me, and here I am. I'm out in the middle of the woods because I chose to. But I felt like the Lord led me, so I did it. You know? The third thing I would tell you is that we are part of a much larger narrative that started longer before us and will finish long after us. So if you're the guy who's like the Philippian jailer, like, you're looking at this situation and you're thinking, it's just about my life, you know? Like, here are these people, they were my prisoners, they got away. But it's way bigger than that, isn't it? You know? Like, God was setting this whole thing up all the way back in Deuteronomy. And now he's fulfilling it in Acts so that Paul can write about it in Philippians. And what's he going to say? He's going to say, I want to encourage you that the things you've endured were for the sake of the gospel. And who's that encouraging? It's us. In some ways, the Philippian jailer is just like the object lesson so we can be encouraged 3,000 years later, 2,000 years later. In your life, in so many ways, you're doing stuff today that you can't anticipate. What does this have to do with anything? And he's setting you up, man. He's going to use you in some ways for things you have no idea, no ability to anticipate. All right? I don't want to go all day, but I have a couple more stories. So one of them is this. We work with these guys in Nepal and India, right on the border of India and Nepal. And I had no interest in ever going to India. I don't know about you guys, but it's just one of those parts of the world I just didn't want to go to. And so in 2005, this guy, this Indian guy, he called my pastor where I was serving. And he said, hey, I want to talk to you about missions. And my pastor had never been on an airplane. He's still only been on an airplane once. Okay? He's from small town Oklahoma. He just doesn't travel. You know, someone put him on a plane so he could elk hunt in Colorado once. That's the only time he's ever been on an airplane. He said, well, you don't need to talk to me. You need to talk to my missions guy. So he gives in my phone number, and he says, I want to do this work in India, and you're going to come and be a part. And I was like, look, dude, I don't have any interest to go to India. And he said, well, we're down in Dallas. Next time you're down in Dallas, come on over. We'll give you, we'll cook you dinner, and we'll talk and whatever. Now, I had no interest in India, but I had interest in free dinner. And so when I went to Dallas, I called the guy. I said, all right, I'm coming. I'm game. You talk to me. I'll come listen to your pitch for free dinner. And so I went there, and he starts talking about all this stuff they're doing in India, and I had no interest. Like, literally none. Then he said, yeah, we've got this new project we're going to start. It's right on the border of Nepal. And it took me back, guys, because my very first mission trip, right before I went, I was praying, and I sensed like the Lord was putting a couple places on my heart. I didn't even know how to have vocabulary to talk about that. But one of them was Nepal. And I didn't know what that was all about. And I said, all right, now you got my attention. He said, we're going to do this great work in Nepal. I said, fine, I'll come. So I went on this trip to India in Nepal, right on the border of Nepal in 2005. And I met a guy. He translated for me. His name was Sanji. Right? He was my translator, and he begins to tell me his story. Okay, this is his story. When he was a kid, when he was a baby, his mother committed suicide. She took poison while nursing him. They found him on her body. Fortunately, he had detached and not taken the poison tube. That was her intention. He still has never seen a picture even of his mother. His father remarried to a lady that didn't care for him. It was pretty rough. By the time he was a teenager, he got cancer in his nose that spread to his brain. Okay? And they told him, look, dude, you're going to die. And every time he would lean down, he would just bleed. And it was really bad. And so this little Christian girl came singing a song about Jesus. Jesus is your father. Jesus is your mother. Come to him. He will give you life. And he said, you sing about this Jesus, but I'm a Hindu. And the lady said, the young girl said, you should come to this crusade. We want to pray for you. And he said, but I'm a Hindu. And she said, yeah, but you're going to die. So he went and God healed him. Hallelujah. Right? He went home, and his father said, you're going to convert to Hinduism, back to Hinduism, or we're going to kick you out of the family. And they brought these guys to force him back to convert, and he jumped out of the bathroom window and ran away.
Wow.
And someone who had been at the crusade where he got healed found him, crying on the side of the road like he's out here stuck. And they took him in, took him to a Bible school. And they trained him. His family just thought he was gone and dead, right? And so here he was, having been trained doing this. And then I meet him in 2005. He becomes my translator. And this is what he tells me. He says, hey, man, I really want to start a new ministry. I have this vision to do like a Bible training school for all these village pastors up in the Himalayas. And I just need some land. I need you to help me buy the land. And I was like, look, dude, I don't know who you think I am. I pastor a church of like 60 20-year-olds. You want me to buy land in India? He said, you know, it's so many lakhs rupees. I was like, I don't know what that means. What is it in dollars? He said, yeah, this piece of land, it's like $1,500. And I thought, you know what? We can do this. And went back to my church, and I said, guys, we're going to buy land in India. And they're like, you're going to what? And I was like, we're going to buy land in India. And we raised $1,500 and sent it to him. And then they needed another piece of land adjacent to it, so we sent them another $1,500. And they built this land. They got this land. They started to build a school there for training people, right? And then after a while, they started a school there, like for kids. There's 200 kids in the school now, right? And the Bible training school is sending people all over the place. They're training all kinds of village pastors. He's working with me now. We worked with him for a long time. I will see him again in December when I'm there. But it's crazy now, right? I just got back a few weeks ago from speaking in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, to a group of Nepali refugees, right? And here's the deal. Their pastor is my buddy Sanjeev's nephew, right? And he came to know the Lord through his uncle's ministry, not knowing that they were related.
Wow.
Because he thought Sanjeev was gone, right? From the time he was little, he was gone. He was like written off from the family. No one knew. And he came to know the Lord. And now here this guy is. He's pastoring a church of Nepali refugees in South Dakota because the United Nations has relocated them over here. And we keep going to India and Nepal and serving in these kind of places. And it's weird. Now, I want you to think about this. These guys are Nepali refugees from Bhutan. We bring them to India to teach them to reach Nepali refugees in the United States when the UN relocates them. It's the craziest thing in the world, you guys. No one will believe it if you didn't live it. But this is what I'm trying to say. Like, we're part of a much bigger narrative. We have no idea. For me, it was like I look back at this and I talk to those guys in Sioux Falls. I'm like, let me tell you your story. And they see me in some weird way like their spiritual grandpa, you know, because we helped to plant the ministry that put them there. And I look at this whole community of guys. It's all done in Nepali, by the way. And like 75 people at this church, refugees. And it's crazy because we're part of a bigger plan that you don't understand. And so my last thing today, and then I'll pray. Those of us privileged enough to receive the gift of the gospel have a responsibility to share it with other people. And even if doing so means some pretty significant changes and sacrifices in your life. Like, you need to be investing time, money, energy in kingdom projects, in church planting, churches like this one, projects. And it doesn't have to be through our ministry, though we would be honored if it was, and it's an answer to prayer for us if it is. But the real issue here, guys, is there are people on the other side of your story. Your faithfulness, even however small it seems. I know when you show up, sometimes you're like, oh, I'm in a church, in another church's building, with 25 people or something. Like, how significant is that? Guys, it matters. It matters to people on the other side of the globe in ways that you can't even appreciate. And so when you study through the book of Acts, I know it's so easy to look at this and say, that was a long time ago. That was a long time ago, a lot of different stuff, and how crazy is this story? But in some ways, it's still your story. It's still my story. God's writing it now, you know, and He's writing it through your faithfulness. And, you know, so, like, I came to New York mostly just to come and tell you guys, hey, man, there are people praying for you all over the world. Like, really, there are. That you would do what it is that the Lord has called you to do, and that you would be faithful, and that He will use you here to reach people. You live in a place, you know there are people all around here who are hurting, who are in need of the gospel, and God's plan for that is like you. You know? You live on the mission field, so do I. You know, in my lifetime, the United States will receive more missionaries than it sends. Right? That's the thing. It's happening. People are sending people here. If you take all the unchurched people in the United States and made them their own country, just all the non-Christians, It'd be the 7th largest country in the world.
Wow.
The largest mission field in the Western Hemisphere is the United States. Right? So church planting in the United States is a huge, huge deal. And you should be encouraged that you're a part of that situation. And so I know I am. I'm encouraged to be a part with you and to be able to come and share. So Ryan told me, hey, this is where we are. I was like, we're going to find a date. I'm coming because I want to be here. I want to share, with what God's doing here and to come and see it. And I'm really, really grateful for the opportunity. And so I'm just going to pray for you guys and challenge you to just, let the Lord help you see where you are, a lot of the big picture, not just your own stuff. I know when you come this morning and when you leave this afternoon, there's a party that's like, all right, I got 50 things on my mind and all kinds of stuff that's all over the place. All that's real. That's real. It's valid. Nobody wants to tell you that's not real. But in light of all of that stuff, like God's doing something. And if you can step back and you can see it, right? You can hear the Lord's voice about this stuff. It will change the way you handle your circumstances. It will change the way you live your life. You start to see, man, some of the struggles you're dealing with are the avenue by which you get to share the gospel with some people around you. You ever hear a story, ever be encouraged by anybody who has no problems? Right? Like no one cares about that. They care about people who've been through stuff and who use these things as an avenue to share the gospel with other people. And so many things I encounter now, I just have trained myself. I travel all the time. So I've trained myself to say, like, I am living a sermon illustration at this moment. I need to just enjoy the process. There's nothing I can do about this at the moment, okay? And so, thank you guys so much for letting me come and share. It's a real blessing for me, and we're praying for you guys. And so let me pray, and then I'll be done. Father,